Hello, we are back again to do a topic analysis on the January-February Lincoln-Douglas topic, which is resolved. The United States ought to substantially reduce its military presence in the West Asia-North Africa region. This video will include contention areas that have been successful on this topic so that you are able to become familiar with the common affirmative and negative arguments being run. This video is brought to you by the Speak Out campaign, a youth initiative dedicated to promoting public speaking and civic engagement. With that, let's get into it. Firstly, we'll start with some background information to understand why this topic is important in the first place. The United States has had a lot of military presence in the West Asia-North Africa region, particularly since 9/11. Countries that have had the most controversial presence and where most debate has been centered are Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. But of course, it's not limited to these countries, and great arguments can still be made for many other countries. Most debaters will be well off in traditional circuits defending their side as a general principle and using examples of specific countries to back this up, while on the circuit, debaters could benefit from specifying a specific type of country or a few countries or a specific type of military presence. Of course, to understand the topic, we need to go over some definitions. I've picked arguably the most important ones here. Substantially reduced has several different ways to define it, but many define it as a 25% reduction, a 50% reduction, or they just define it as a general principle or an important amount. Military presence also has many ways to define it. You probably want to tailor this to your own case, but many of the common definitions being run are military presence as troops or boots on the ground, as well as a definition that includes not only troops, but also things like bases, firearms, air forces, and other things like that. Particularly with this topic, though, it will be important for debaters to be ready to defend their definitions. Thirdly, the use of the word "its" in the wording of the resolution could be taken to mean either yes, we can specify a country to reduce presence in, or no, we can't. Look up definitions for this and go from there if you are planning on running a case centered around a limited amount of countries. Finally, West Asia North Africa also has several definitions. Most debaters aren't reading out all the definitions in their case, but rather having a list at hand in case the opponent asks. Pick the definition you want based on your own case. Alright, now that we got some background information on the topic, we can talk about framework. Firstly, with the values. Morality, justice, and quality of life are pretty self-explanatory. They can basically be used for most topics. They probably pair well with criterions, including but not limited to utilitarianism and minimizing structural violence. The value of democracy would probably be for debaters who want to center their arguments on the idea that the US should promote democracy around the world, or that having presence in the region reduces the ability to promote democracy. And then Kant's philosophy basically says that the motive of something, not the consequences, determine if it's moral or not, and he also says actions must be universalizable, meaning that an action should only be taken if everyone else can also do it, and I'll talk more about Kant's philosophy more under the contention ideas. The value criterions are also pretty self-explanatory. Here's a little list of some of the ones you can use, but it's obviously not limited to these. Now let's go on to the affirmative arguments for this topic. Number 1 is reducing terrorism. This argument says that U.S. military presence incites more terrorism because terrorists are upset by U.S. intervention in their area, and thus they attack U.S. bases because of that. This creates problems like civilian casualties and could cause the U.S. to get involved in a wider conflict if terrorists were to hurt American troops. All this is to say that U.S. military presence escalates tensions and makes it worse for civilians. Number 2 is reducing Iran danger. Many debaters are choosing to talk about Iran on the affirmative. This argument goes that Iran sees the U.S. as a threat and becomes more aggressive and violent in an attempt to deter the U.S. This is backed up by the fact that Iran has launched attacks against the U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. All of this can lead to miscalculation and a larger conflict, which is very dangerous and leads to a laundry list of impacts that includes death, destruction of cities and infrastructure, and more terrorism. Number 3 is promoting democracy. The U.S. is known to have the goal of promoting democracy across the world. However, the U.S. in having military presence in the region is essentially supporting many autocratic regimes and sends the message that even though human rights abuses are being committed, the U.S. will still provide security reassurances to those countries. Number 4 is conserving resources. This says that a huge military presence takes many resources such as lots of money, fossil fuels to power the military bases, and even resources like metals that are used to sustain military presence becoming depleted. Doing the right research here would be key to finding evidence to support these arguments, and also if you choose to run that military presence causes more emissions and depletes fossil fuel resources, you would probably want to pair that with an extinction impact about climate change. Number 5 is specifying Iraq and Syria. Many debaters are running this in the circuits where it's more accepted to run policy-type arguments. This affirmative would focus on military presence in Syria and Iraq and talk about how that presence is causing those countries to retaliate against the United States. Escalation could easily occur when this happens and could lead to dangerous impacts such as nuclear war. Number 6 is specifying Palestine. This argument could probably go multiple ways, but one way I've seen it run is in a way that is related to settler colonialism. Debaters argue that settler colonialism explains Israel's occupation of Palestine and that U.S. military presence and support for Israel just further fuels that. It results in more deaths and also risks the U.S. getting involved into a much larger conflict. While many debaters are running this argument, it can still be a controversial one to read due to the Israel-Hamas conflict, so just be aware of that. Lastly, for the affirmative arguments is a Kant-based affirmative. Kant holds that establishing armies in other countries is not okay under his philosophy because warfare and hostility make trust impossible and spur more aggression. He also holds that interfering in the governance and sovereignty of other states violates perpetual peace, which is also one of Kant's ideas that you can look more into if you are interested in running a Kant AF. Kant would also argue that the intention of the U.S. military in intervening in internal conflicts is morally wrong. Now we can move on to the negative side. On the negative, debaters can also run terrorism. Terrorism is one of the core arguments on either side of this topic and usually happens to be where a lot of debate on this topic boils down to. This argument says that presence is needed to deter terrorism. Many debaters are choosing to talk about how there hasn't been a major Middle East war in the past 30 years due to military presence, and only the perception of withdrawal has spurred more wars. A key component of this argument is also that presence keeps threats at bay and stops escalation from occurring. A second negative argument is oil insecurity. It says that U.S. presence is key to keeping the Strait of Hormuz open for exporting oil, and that U.S. presence allows the United States to keep relations with big oil countries like Saudi Arabia via security protections the U.S. provides. Usually debaters have also been reading that if the U.S. leaves, it causes instability in this region and causes oil prices to fluctuate, which leads to negative economic effects. That further spirals down into more additional negative effects. There are so many areas debaters can choose to talk about in regards to this. The third negative argument is fill-in. This argument says that powers like Russia and China fill in when the United States military leaves the West Asia North Africa region because there will no longer be a power there to stop them. That's important because the U.S. doesn't want these countries gaining control over the region because it threatens American interests and can create more conflict. Fourth is hegemony. This argument says that the U.S. needs to maintain its hegemony by having a presence in the region. Leaving causes the U.S. to lose that leverage. Debaters should probably be ready to defend hegemony being a good thing since many debaters will quickly retaliate with hegemony bad. I've put a few arguments for why hegemony is good on this slide. Fifth is reducing nuclear proliferation. This argument says that U.S. presence stops countries from proliferating because they don't feel a need to proliferate when they have a security guarantee from the United States. To make this argument, you probably want to hash out why proliferation is a bad thing and how it could easily lead to escalation, such as in the form of nuclear war. Sixth is a counterplan for more progressive circuits. The argument can be made that maybe there isn't enough military presence and that more presence is needed to deter attacks and escalation. To run this argument, debaters can include arguments like the terrorism contention and find historical evidence on how increasing presence may have helped countries in this region become more stable. This argument might also pair well with arguments like oil insecurity, fill-in, and hegemony, since increasing U.S. military presence would probably further solidify the U.S. control over the region. Seventh is a critique for those that enjoy running them in progressive circuits. The thesis of this argument is that the way we talk and think about policies influence those policies, and that the AF securitization is bad because they securitize the West Asia North Africa region in their discourse of it. Importantly, this case should be very specific to the affirmative and should make it clear that it's not only necessarily saying that all securitization is bad, but rather the affirmative securitization is bad. This is only beginning to touch the surface of this case, so if you want more on this case, there are plenty of disclosed security cases on Open Case List. Alright, that concludes this topic analysis video on the January-February LD topic. I hope you found this video helpful, and on behalf of the Speak Out campaign, good luck at your tournaments.